Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, yeah. Everybody else is okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Monday. Well, now I'm all, oh, that's great. Really?
Okay. So we are going to shift to probabilistic logic from propositional logic, getting a sense of power and the limitations of what propositional logic can do, and go from there to pointing out that it actually doesn't support plausible reasoning, and kind of getting a sense of what is missing, things like understanding qualification and ramification problems, and why monotonic logics, what you learned till now is a monotonic logic. Once you prove a theorem, it will always remain proved. It will never become unproved. Why that would not be enough, you need to be able to change your mind in real world. And then basically, we'll talk about ways of making logic non-monotonic, which is one is a non-monotonic logic itself from the logical perspective. There are a bunch of other crazy ideas, including fuzzy logic, certainty factors, and then we will finally settle, for this class at least, on probabilistic logic. Furthermore, happy Deepavali for those of you who know what Deepavali is. It's a festival of lights in India. I got you all raspberry bars, which is what we eat in India on Deepavali day, right? Okay, but since I cannot unfortunately let you eat during the class, this is actually a double whammy for you. I will end the class 10 minutes before. And now this is what my wife said, that they'll be more thankful that you're ending 10 minutes before than that you're actually getting sweets. It's unfortunate. Okay. So, and then we have plates, we have like the Ziploc bags, and there are things that you can, the prongs, etc. And please take them. They're like 50 pieces there. And you guys can put on some weight. I, on the other hand, probably should. Okay, so that's what we will do. So remind me when I come close, we need to give 10 minutes because otherwise, basically, you won't have time to take them. Yeah, it's unfortunate. In the past, people will just take it. And so at least there'll be a happy class once they were eating while listening. But we can't do it this time, unfortunately. Okay, so that's the deal. Any questions before I get started? Okay. So let's get going. So basically, we are going to remember that we solved problems using, we talked about propositional logic. Propositional logic can be used to do various kinds of reasoning. For example, in the way you go about doing it is you need to write what you know as propositional formulas. Then the theorem proving will tell you whether a given sentence will hold given what you know. That's what we thought of, right? And in particular, while we mostly focused on asking, given my database, given my knowledge base, does this following theorem hold? So for example, asking, does KB entail some fact F? It can also actually be used to do things like, is my knowledge base consistent to begin with? Do you understand what I'm saying? So for example, does KB entail false? If KB entails false, that means my knowledge base is already inconsistent. And furthermore, one interesting cute thing is, if somebody tells me a fact about the world, I'm not sure whether to believe it or not. This is a new fact they told me. It's not that it's following from what I know. Okay. So then the question is, I know KB and somebody said S is true. The question is, can I believe S without my brain exploding? Okay. And I can believe S without my brain exploding if it doesn't entail false. Do you understand what I'm saying? So again, remember, one of these huge things is knowledge constrains the number of possible worlds you can be in. It's a great way to think about it. Knowledge is what reduces freedom in terms of choosing any random worlds. So you could not choose crazy things that that are not consistent with the stuff that you already know to be true about the world, for example. So the knowledge base by itself, maybe let's say, is satisfied by some set of worlds W1. The sentence is satisfied by some set of worlds W2. As long as W1 intersection W2 is not phi, not empty, you can believe this fact. In fact, one of the interesting things is that, so just because KB and S don't entail false does not mean that KB entails S. It's consistent to believe this. It is not necessarily following from what you know. Of course, the things that follow from what you know will be consistent. Okay, but it also means that in every world you are true, that fact is also true in the case of following. That means in a way, the entailed fact was known to you. You just were asleep. You didn't realize it. Whereas a consistent fact is something that is not known to you. It sort of reduces the number of worlds you can possibly be in to this intersection. And as long as the intersection is not empty, it's okay. And in fact, this is where a whole bunch of problems in the current day world work, because we all have knowledge bases, we have beliefs, and we tend to believe in the news stories that are consistent with what we already believe. This is what is called the confirmation bias. Okay. And the point is, basically, you're going to believe all the stories that are sort of consistent with what you believe about the world. And sometimes, actually, what you believe about the world may have bugs. And when you get this new knowledge, you may have to remove something from what you believe just to be able to take this knowledge in. But if it is against your beliefs, you'll say, I'm not going to believe this new story. And Facebook has actually figured out, Metaverse has figured out how to tell you the stories that you will like because they're consistent with your beliefs. Okay, so those are three things that you can do. You people understand that. But basically, it's the same connection as entailment, except you can also do this. Okay, so I want to look at a little example. This example sort of is the following. Judah Pearl, lives in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles in a high crime area. and Pearl installed a burglar alarm. He asked his neighbors, John and Mary, to call him if they hear the alarm going off. This way he can come home if there is a burglary. Los Angeles is also earthquake prone. And an alarm sometimes, an earthquake can sometimes set off an alarm. Burglars can set off an alarm. Earthquakes also can set up an alarm. Right? You don't understand the story now. So I'm going to write this. Burglary implies alarm. Earthquake implies alarm. Alarm implies John calls. Alarm implies Mary calls. That's my story. Right? If I can write it like this, then I can ask some simple questions. If there is a burglary, will Mary call? Okay? Well, yes, because you can actually prove that burglary will make alarm go off, alarm will make Mary call. In particular, if you do full-on theorem proving, you will be able to prove that this and burglary entails Mary calls. That's what you said. Okay, this is your knowledge base, this whole thing, and this is the fact. And you threw this fact in, and then you can entail that Mary calls, so you believe that Mary will call. The next question I have is, if Mary didn't call, is it possible that burglary occurred? If Mary didn't call, is it possible that burglary occurred? Well, according to this, if Mary doesn't call, that means alarm couldn't have happened. That means if alarm couldn't have happened, burglary could have happened. So burglary could have happened. So useful questions you can answer. This much you can do with propositional logic for this story. Right? But then you might want to ask, first of all, as nice as this story is, this is not very realistic because there are all sorts of constraints of the real world it's missing. This is a little more realistic. This one basically adds on top of what I already told you the following things. Pearl lives in real world where burglars can sometimes disable alarms. Some earthquakes may be too slight to cause an alarm. Even in Los Angeles, burglaries are more likely than earthquakes. John and Mary both have their own lives, surprisingly enough, and may not always call when the alarm goes off, even though you told them to, right? And then finally, between John and Mary, John is more of a slacker than Mary. So in fact, if the alarm is going off, Mary is more likely to call than John. Again, and then John and Mary may call even without an alarm going off. You can't just assume that because they called, the world ended. Do you understand what I'm saying? All of this is true. You kind of assume this is kind of the way the real world works. But the question, of course, is how can I capture that by extending this knowledge in the propositional logic? In particular, this is basically what we're going to look at. I mean, of course, you will jump ahead and say, well, all that means is all of these are probabilistic. Burglary causing alarm is kind of possible. And similarly, earthquake causing alarm is kind of possible, etc., etc. But before you jump there, I want you to actually think about why is it hard to use propositional logic or first order logic in real world scenarios? Yes?
Because we have to use or statements for a lot of those, that would be very useful.
What?
We have to use or statements for a lot of the propositions, and they would be very useful.
Or statements meaning what?
Like the burglary line. Okay, it's like I was thinking that because like the burglary being like conditional for alarm is always true anymore. So it's
so yeah, I think we'll get to it in a minute, but essentially I think you are on the right track, but we'll see. Yes, go ahead.
Is it because events in the real world are not always guaranteed to happen?
So that's true, but the question is, can the models be, in essence, what we are saying is this is not a high fidelity model of the world. That's basically what you say. You kind of agree this is true, but it's only approximately true. So the question is, if I want to increase its fidelity to the world, then what do I wind up having to do? And moreover, can I ask certain, so can I also ask certain kinds of questions? For example, if I have this kind of information, I maybe want to also ask these additional red questions, which I couldn't have asked at all before. One is, John already called. If Mary also calls, is it more likely that the burglary occurred? What do you think? In general, plausibly speaking, yes. If somebody comes out, into this room saying, fire, let's go out, you say, oh, bozo, let's wait for a second. And then 2 more people come, then you're worried. If nobody ever tells a lie in the world, nobody ever tells a noisy information, the first person said there's a fire, we should all just leave right then. Okay, because the fact that because none of these implications are essentially certain, you have to assume that when John calls, if Mary also calls, your belief in burglary increases. Okay. Furthermore, let's say John called and Mary called. They only called. They didn't say anything. You can see on your cell phone, John is calling, Mary is calling. Okay. And then you also have TV on. Pearl has TV on apparently in his office, and he sees that there is an earthquake. I don't know why he has to see it on the TV. Maybe he could also feel it, but there may be it was far enough. He's living far enough, and so he sees that there's an earthquake. Now, my question is, do you think that the belief in the burglary will reduce because there is an earthquake? How many people think that, because remember, all you know is the calls came. Okay, and basically you haven't yet, they didn't yet tell you that there's a burglary. So you basically think that when the calls came, you thought burglary is likely. So when the first call came, you thought burglary is slightly likely. Second call came, it's a little more likely. You see what I'm saying? Then you saw on the TV that there is basically an earthquake. My question is, think not about AI, not just for speak for yourself. If you now see that there is an earthquake, do you think that your belief in burglary remains the same, increases or reduces?
Reduces, in that case. The same. Reduces.
How many people think it reduces? Okay. At least I guess you are not common enough, so you should not take part in the Wheel of Fortune, because Wheel of Fortune is all about whether or not you are common enough. But in general, plausible reasoning says that if you came up with a hypothesis as to some conspiracy theory, and you find some other thing which explains what happened, the need for this conspiracy reduces. This is basically what is called explaining away. This is what is called explaining away. You see what I'm saying? So I basically say, no, somebody threw a rock at me and I think it is you. I mean, somebody threw stones at my house and it's you. Then you bring this other guy and say, no, this guy threw the house, threw the stone. Then I clearly reduce my belief that you threw the stone. Is it for sure? No, it's not for sure. It's possible that both of you threw stones and you just put that guy under the bus. You see what I'm saying? But in general, this is plausible reasoning. You do allow for explaining away as a way of reasoning. This is impossible to capture in propositional algebra. Do you understand what I'm saying? Again, do you know where explaining away is extremely useful? Forget about the example I gave you. You go with sore throat. I mean, random numbers of you guys are having sore throats. You go and say, okay, I want to write my will because I'm sure I have COVID. And the doctor says, no, you have flu. You seem to have flu. At that point, do you stop writing will, or you think I'm one of those really, really unlucky people who had both flu and COVID at the same time? which by the way is possible. Nobody said you can't have both at the same time. But because you have one explanation for your symptoms, you are happy enough. You start singing and going home thinking, it's just flu, I'm fine. That's explaining away. This happens all the time in medical diagnosis. It's not that they proved that you don't have the costlier disease, the bigger disease. It is that there is a simpler explanation and it should be enough. Let's for a while. And as I said, you can be the unluckiest person who actually did have all the diseases at the same time. And they all actually cause the same symptom at different levels of strength. At which point, yeah, I mean, you made a mistake. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. I mean, I can tell you, there are all sorts of crazy stories of real life that happen where, in fact, you can't explain away things. But in general, explaining away is something that we do plausibly. Yes, there was a question.
Yeah, I'm just having a hard time wrapping my brain around why a burglary would be less likely because they're independent of each other. Like
no, they're not, right? Because if you draw the picture, it looks like this. Burglary, earthquake, alarm, John calls, Mary calls. Burglary and earthquake both affect alarm going off. Alarm affects John calling, alarm affects Mary calling. This is basically the connection between the variables. And in particular, explaining away always occurs when you wind up essentially having, so if you know that alarm has gone off and you also know that earthquake occurred, then the need for burglary reduces. That's what's called explaining away. And when you saw the TV, you saw that there is an earthquake. So both of them could have caused alarm. Since one of them is already true, the other is not needed. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it's less likely, plausibly speaking. Yes.
I think the reason I said it would say the same earlier is because I'm also assuming that the burglars have their own knowledge base, which includes the fact that the alarm would go off if there's an earthquake, which means that they would exploit this situation that, yeah, there's no.
That's a very different story. I mean, but there is a circularity there eventually. I mean, I agree that burglars certainly, I mean, this is the whole Back to the Future story, right? Essentially, you are essentially allowing an external event that is about to happen. He exploits it in the Back to the Future, the movie, right? I mean, I don't want to give away in case you haven't seen the movie or something. But, I agree that in fact, the burglary agents, they're actual people, again, that's a good point in the sense that once I know that you will explain away, I can misuse that. That's exactly what you did earlier when, I mean, I know you, I would say you, but I mean, the person that I said who tried to show me somebody else as the guy who's throwing stones at my home, even though they were also throwing stones at me. And since I found one, suspect, then I just give up and say, you're fine. And that's how basically people frame other people. But more important here is explaining away can happen. It doesn't mean that it will always be true. It's just that it can happen, and you should be able to capture it. By the way, one of the very interesting points is this explaining away is something that we talk about, this idea called Bayes nets, which as a representation for probabilistic inference. Bayes nets are actually capable of capturing explaining away. And there are other things for probabilistic reasoning, such as Markov random fields, and they can't capture explaining away. We'll get to that later. Any other questions? Okay. So now my question is, so first of all, I kind of told you that, we do have more interesting real world constraints and you need to be able to represent them. And you need to be able to reason about queries like this. I mean, you're in your back of your mind, you want to just jump to probability and be done with it anyway. You will do it, but I want to go there slowly. So the question is, how do we handle real world? Okay. One idea is omniscient and eager way, eager and omniscient way, which is model everything. You understand what I'm saying? So model exactly the conditions under which John will call. So I just said, if alarm goes off, John calls. But that's not always the case. Sometimes John won't call. Then I'll say, if alarm goes off and John is not doing something else, and John is not listening to music, and John is not feeling particularly slacky that day, and John is something else, and John is something else, then he will call. So I'm capturing all the qualifications as part of my rule. If I do that, then I can get back to propositional logic. It's important to understand that you can do that. Again, the thing I want you to understand is there is a reason why we go to probabilities, because we want to be ignorant and lazy. And it's not a bad judgment thing. In fact, if you are not ignorant and lazy, with our small brains and other life, etc., we'll never be able to get done reasoning about these very complicated scenarios. Okay. So basically what I want to say is A and some condition 1 and some condition 2 and some condition 3, etc., blah, blah, some Cn implies J. The interesting thing is, in any real world, the number of these special conditions, basically you can imagine that these are all preconditions that qualify when John will call. In addition to alarm, all these other things must be true before John calls. And these are all exceptions. And the exceptions may have correlations. Okay. And so this basically writing it this way is, so first of all, what I'm saying is that exceptions might themselves have connections. So for example, if C1 and C5 is true, then maybe C9 can't be true. And you want to capture that. This is model everything. Eager and omniscient. Eager because you're actually modeling everything. Omniscient because you think that you know all the variables that can possibly affect John calling, given that alarm is going on. You guys understand that? Okay. If you can do that, the problem, of course, is suppose I asked the following question. Suppose instead of this John calling, suppose I asked, give me a rule for what do you need to get the car started in the morning. I mean, I know there you guys. There used to be these things called cars that people start instead of just calling Uber, but let's imagine you read about it in the books. And so then if you want to start a car, right, how do you do? What do you do? What is the requirements? I mean, X means I can start the car. What is it? If you have the key, you can start the car. Is that enough? You have the key and
The car.
what?
The car itself.
The car itself, of course. There's a car and the key, and then what else?
You, the driver, need to be
The driver should be there. What else?
tank.
Gasoline in the tank. What else?
Get on the brake.
What the brake? Yeah, the parking brake is not on. What else?
Have your spark plugs.
Blah, blah, yeah, spark plug. What else? So here is the thing. Imagine, since anyway we wanted to get done fast, we can spend the rest of the class trying to write. Do you think we'll ever run out of things? It turns out you can't. Even if you wait until the end of the class, I would argue that irrespective of what you did, I can still stymie you. Suppose you came up with all possible conditions that can go wrong. Then I will show you that you did not capture the most important condition, which is there is a potato in the tailpipe. Again, before Tesla, there used to be internal combustion engines, for which there is, I know some of these examples are getting dated. Right. and then so you basically, if you were to put a potato in a normal internal combustion engine car's tailpipe, then the car basically sputters and stops. You can do this, like maybe your dad or granddad has one of these cars, try that. No, it's a good deal. So you did not think about it. My point is the qualification problem. You cannot ever write all possible preconditions in any real world. If it's an artificial world where you stabilized it, for example, such that only so many things can go off kilter, then yes, you can write. But in a real world, you probably will never be, there is never any end to the exceptions that can happen. That's the qualification problem. And the guy who came up with this potato in the tailpipe is the guy who gave the field the name AI. Believe it or not. John McCarthy came up with this example of potato in the tailpipe. Okay. So the interesting thing is that's like it will stick in your head that you can never really give all possible conditions. But imagine you're crazy enough and you wrote all these conditions. Even this one was written. Then the other problem basically is that now that you have this, every day before you start the car, you're going to check this. Right? I mean, that guy will check if he has a car or not. The other guy will check, am I there? Which is an existential question. And then he'll start reading Sartre and all that stuff, gets into lots of problems. Okay. And then there are people, and then some other people, some of you will start looking carefully at the tailpipe potato. And then the neighborhood also gets stuck because they can't go to their work because they have this crazy guy in the neighborhood who seems to be doing this calisthenics, just starting the car. And you will never start the car anyway. The point being that it's not enough to just write the condition. If you write the condition, you're going to check the condition. And you'll die checking all these conditions. If there are a million conditions that are all going to say, yes, they are true, but you still have to check them, then you spent a million amount of work. Do you understand what I'm saying? So basically, even if you can write, you would basically die trying to use these conditions. It'd just be too costly. So the other alternative is basically the opposite, ignorant and lazy way. We'll all be very happy to do that. You know, ignorant and lazy way is basically just sort of saying, one idea is that this rule that I'm giving is sort of kind of true, wishy-washy. And if it goes wrong, don't blame me. And in fact, it's one of these things I was just thinking that if you ever tell people whatever you say, and maybe in the end, then they can't sue you because you didn't guarantee anything. I said maybe, and it didn't happen, so that's fine. Okay. Now, of course, the robot using the maybe rules might be using them in a non-ergodic world and might die. That's always possible. Okay. But in general, you can do ignorant and lazy approach. And so, for example, model the likelihood. You might want to say things like, in 85% of the world where there was an alarm, John will actually call. That might be an idea. That's the idea that you're ready to believe in because you want to jump to probabilistic reasoning already. It turns out that actually there are other ideas before we get to this. This is basically the probabilistic view, but you can think of non-monadic logics, certainty factors, and fuzzy logic. I'll mention all of them one slide at a time, not because they are good, but because, as Santayana said, those who don't read history are condemned to repeat it. Do you understand what I'm saying? So these ideas are not great ideas. Some of them are definitely bad ideas. Some are not, they're actually possible, but nobody has been able to make them work right now. So at least you need to know what people have tried. There's a rich intellectual tradition in trying to deal with the fact that you are stuck with qualification and ramification problems. By the way, I mentioned what qualification is. Ramification is the other version, which is after an action, do you know what things will be changing? In the strips representation that I was talking about in the last class, I just said an action tells you exactly what are its preconditions and exactly what it will change. Now, in any realistic world, if one variable changes, as I said, butterfly effect can happen. But I also said that if the world is full of butterfly effects, we would all be dead. We wouldn't be here. But it is possible that non-local interactions might exist. And that's the worst case scenario, and that's the ramification problem. So in general, in any real world, you can never tell what are all the things that are needed for an action to succeed. And you can never tell what all will change after the action succeeds. Other than that, everything is fine. Which looks very sad because what will you do with the action? Okay. So anyway, so we're going to talk about this non-monotonic logic, certainty factors, and fuzzy logic, and then get into the other one. So one of the interesting things worth noting in the rest of this discussion is that you might just say, why didn't just people go directly to probability? Why go through these steps? Well, it's because, again, all sciences, as I said, science might be rational. Pursuit of science is nothing like rational. So people made lots and lots of decisions saying, no. Do you use numbers? Are you guys aware of using numbers, crunching numbers in your head in making decisions? Do you understand what I'm saying? So you seem to think that, I'm having headache, maybe I have COVID. Did you do that? I'm having headache and COVID implies headache with the following probability. And I did all these Bayesian rule calculations and looks like there's a probability of, 3 times 10 power minus 14 that I have COVID. Did you do that? No. Yeah, looks like it's possible that I have COVID. So if people are doing numerical reasoning, they are certainly not consciously aware of it. So that basically meant that a lot of researchers said, hey, you're not using numbers, I'm not using numbers, we are intelligent. So maybe intelligence doesn't require use of numbers in doing decisions. It looks silly if you think about it that way. But again, as I said, lots and lots of silly things have been collectively agreed upon. Like, for example, we agreed that the Earth is in the middle of the universe for a long, long time. Right? And so basically it is possible. And so it's worth understanding that. And so here is like an interesting scenario in terms of Tweety bird. How many of you know Tweety bird, by the way? Okay. So Tweety is a bird. And and the question is, will Tweety fly? Yeah. Tweety is an bird. Tweety is an ostrich. It's a bird, but it's an ostrich. Will Tweety fly? Tweety is a magical ostrich. Will Tweety fly? Tweety is a magical ostrich which just lost its magic wand. Will Tweety fly? You see where I'm going? You're making your mind, you're changing your mind. You're flip-flopping, which is like the worst thing you can do in politics. First you said it will fly. Then you said it won't fly. Then you said it will fly. Then you said it won't fly. I keep adding, adding evidence, and you keep changing your mind. And then that's how you lose elections. As I said, they say flip-floppers. But in real world, one of the interesting things is, even though you said the Tweety will fly, the moment I said Tweety is an ostrich, then you said Tweety won't fly. So can propositional logic actually capture this? It turns out normal logic, either propositional or predicate or first order logic, they're all called monotonic logics. If you say KB implies F, then I say KB and I add some more statements, F1 and F2. You can't say it won't entail F. This is not possible. Do you understand what I just said? Further, worse yet, actually, in fact, you're even saying things like it entails not F. So originally you said the bird will be flying. And then when I said it's ostrich, I just added an extra piece of information. And he said, it's now not flying. But you gave me a proof saying it is flying. What happened to that proof? Do you understand what I'm saying? This is actually something that most people don't understand when they think of logic upfront. Logic, normal logic, does not allow you to go back. Once you proved a statement, it's proved forever. So if you don't ever want to jump to conclusions, so basically what that means is the way you will have to deal with it is, when I say Tweety is a bird, and I say, do you think it will fly? If you want to not change your mind, you should say, I'll think about it. Tell me more. Then I say it's an ostrich. You should still not jump. I'll think about it. Tell me more. And you keep saying this until the world ends and I get sick of you and then I leave. Because you'll never make up your mind. If you never make up your mind, you cannot be wrong. Do you understand what I'm saying? Which is why politicians never stand for anything, because if they stand for anything, then the additional knowledge comes, they have to say, oh, we no longer stand for that. Instead, if you're wishy-washy, if you say everything is possible, I'm sort of thinking of kind of possibly maybe one of these days considering sitting down and thinking about it, then you're fine. Nobody can say you changed your mind. But it also means that the agent will never make any decisions. So it may be able to win elections, but it may also be run over by a bus. Remember that kid that I talked to you about? The kid, I must have talked to you about the kid who the father takes, or father or mother takes the kid and says, kid, this is a bus. And the kid doesn't want to jump to any conclusions. Who knows what the bus is? I mean, maybe the entire thing is the bus, the yellow color is the bus, the iron rods are the bus. So I'll just wait until you figure out. And those kids will be run over by the bus. It's the same thing here. If you don't make up your mind ever, then you will be run over by the bus. But at the same time, if you make up your mind, you have to change your mind as new evidence comes. Which is why actually there's this beautiful statement. I think somebody says, I forget the origin of the source. When facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, ma'am? You understand what I'm saying? So we assume that additional facts come. That means essentially your knowledge base has new information because of which you change the conclusion. This is something logic cannot do. You see what I'm saying? If you want to make logic do it, then you have to do non-monotonic logic. I'll talk to you in a minute about it. And essentially what it does is it says things like, if bird X and not abnormal X implies flies X. You're saying, what's the big deal? It still looks like a logical sentence. However, this predicate abnormal is itself an abnormal predicate. Such that, remember in normal logic, if you can't prove F, it doesn't mean not F is proved. But for abnormality, we'll assume that if I can't prove that you're abnormal, then you are not abnormal. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if you kind of make abnormal predicate be assuming closed world, which means not if KB doesn't prove abnormal X, then you assume KB proves not abnormal X. Remember I said Prolog does this. If you can do this, then the logic will work fine. So essentially you said, basically this is how you will explain your reasoning. Why the heck did you say that the bird will fly? I said, well, I thought it was a normal bird. And when you told me it's an ostrich, everybody knows ostriches are not normal birds. Ostriches are really school buses, as we all know. And so they can't fly. Okay. And so basically you are slowly changing whether something is abnormal or not. By essentially, originally you couldn't prove that it's abnormal, so you assume it's not abnormal. But ostrich is certainly an abnormal bird. Because of which this rule won't work. By doing this, you allow logic to be defeasible. That means it can take back what it said. You understand? A monotonic logic can never take back what it said. Whereas a defeasible logic can say, hey, I thought it was abnormal, but now it wasn't abnormal because I couldn't prove it to be abnormal. But now I can actually prove it to be abnormal. So I can't assume it's not abnormal. And remember that saying that ostrich is abnormal, that proof itself can recursively have special cases. In the sense, ostrich is abnormal only if it is not a magical ostrich. It's a, at that point, it suddenly starts, there's a different level of abnormality where again the flying is possible. So you have to model it that way. If you model it that way, you will get to non-monotonic logic. Interestingly, people, if you ask them, why did you jump to conclusions? This is what they'll say. Actually, non-monotonic logic is closer to how people say they jump to, they make their decisions. Now, alternately, you can also think in terms of probability. And one of the interesting things about probability is you no longer probabilistic reasoning, as evidence keeps coming, the truth of a proposition conditional on the evidence can go up, go down, go up, go down, go up, go down. So by definition, probabilistic reasoning, if you look at it from the logic classes, it is already sort of non-monotonic. It's not monotonically increasing. Evidence doesn't monotonically increase your belief in anything. New evidence can reduce it, increase it, reduce it, increase it. You guys get that? So probability, so you could do it this way. So probability Tweety flies given Tweety is a bird is 0.99. Probability that Tweety flies, that Tweety is a bird and Tweety is an ostrich is 0.4. Probability that Tweety flies given Tweety is a bird and Tweety is an ostrich and Tweety is a magical ostrich is 0.8. I can give these numbers, and basically you will start changing your conditional as the new evidence keeps coming. The probability of Tweety flying, conditional on all the evidence you have till now, might go up, come down, go up, come down. So probabilistic reasoning is already non-monotonic in the way we are thinking about it. Yes.
Possible for new evidence to not change.
Of course. That's when you would say new evidence is independent of the variable. That's the probabilistic independence. In fact, this is actually an extremely important point. The whole point of the efficiency hack in probabilistic reasoning comes from assuming, or at least praying, that not everything is dependent on everything. You understand what I'm saying? So for example, hopefully, probability that Tweety flies, given that Tweety is a bird, and then one more piece of information, and I don't know, today is Sunday, may be the same as probability that Tweety flies given Tweety is a bird. Okay, so in fact, just a second. In fact, what you would say in that case is basically PA given BC is the same as PA given B. In which case, A is independent of C given B. And we will talk a lot about this. That's really the theory of how you make probabilistic inference doable. Yes, there was a raised hand somewhere. Yes.
So this is all based, so when we use probability, we're usually, not probability, propositional logic, we're usually using explicit knowledge instead of tacit knowledge. But in this case, we're combining the two together that we keep changing our knowledge.
No, you say this explicit knowledge and all your laziness and ignorance is converted into this number. The number is inscrutable.
But that's what makes the knowledge base tacit, and because you're changing it based off of things that you're learning.
No. Tacit basically means you can't write anything like at all about that knowledge base. Here, I think that there's an interesting point you're making, but we'll have to take it offline. But the point is that not everything that is relevant to the statement is being explicitly stated. So there is degrees of explicitness. You at least said, for example, alarm goes, John calls, and then put a 0.7. As against John calls 0.2. That is prior probability of John calling is 0.2. Without saying anything about special conditions. Do you see what I'm saying? And the other point, of course, is that The reason this is explicit is things like alarm going off and John calling are concepts we understand. So we can actually reason about what this statement is saying. Okay. Anyway, so there's actually, this one is basically saying that there were, during the different times, there were papers saying in defense of logic that somehow people should take logic seriously, and then in defense of probability, maybe they should take probability seriously. Now in defense of basically what Reluce, or in defense of backpropagation, which is what we are doing right now. Okay, but in general, there is this pendulum swinging goes on that, and this is basically the sentence, the slide about non-monotonic logic, but I already explained it with respect to that example. You can read this in terms of my explanation of abnormality predicates. And one of the interesting things is that the theory, in fact, John McCarthy, remember Einstein spent most of his later part of his life doing what? Unified theory for physics, and he failed. Okay, John McCarthy, after coming up with the name for AI, inventing Lisp, doing a whole bunch of other things, he spent most of his life trying to come up essentially with tractable semantics for non-monotonic reasoning. And there's a whole bunch of people who worked on this. His particular version is what's called circumscription. And what circumscription says is that abnormality predicate, which is a non-logical predicate, you want to make sure that it holds only for the least number of objects. Because if you assume everything is abnormal, then you can start proving any random. So you sort of try to minimize the abnormality. I mean, I'm saying it at a syntactic level, at like an informal level, but that winds up being like a big theoretical thing that they worked on. Okay. There was also a bunch of time where people basically said, why can't we just say A implies B and say 0.7, B implies C, 0.4, etc. and somehow just multiply these numbers while doing the theorem proving. So that means you essentially have a propositional theorem proving, right? And so after the theorem has been proved, then you just multiply all the rules you used, the certainties of all the rules you used, and that would be the certainty of the result. Looks like a nice idea. It turns out, unfortunately, it can get into random circularities because implication has nothing to do with causality. Okay, and so basically I can say raining implies grass wet 0.9, and this is what I will call causal direction implication. And then grass wet implies raining. That is also a useful rule, by the way. But this is diagnostic direction implication. Causal direction implication, basically because rain, you believe, causes grass being wet. If you make grass wet, rain doesn't start falling. If you stop rain from falling, grass sometimes will stop becoming wet. Not always, sometimes. You guys understand that? Okay. Now it turns out, by the way, whatever I just said, you all nodded your brain, nodded your heads because you understand how rain works. You already know what causes what in the case of rain. When you're trying to look at observed pieces of evidence in some sort of a disease pathology, you have no clue whether the lesions were caused by the disease or the disease was caused by the lesions. Is Alzheimer's caused by the amyloid plaque or amyloid plaque caused by the Alzheimer's? We have no idea. You understand what I'm saying? Knowing what is causal direction is extra knowledge about the world, and you happen to have it for the world that you are aware of. And this was a hard-won causal knowledge that human civilization gave you. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't at all obvious that rain was not coming because sun going around Earth. That rain is actually coming because of Earth going around sun. Do you see what I'm saying? So the causal knowledge, but the point is, for the domains we know, they can be, which is a causal direction, which is a diagnostic direction. For the diseases we actually understand, we know what are causal, what is diagnostic. Flu causes runny nose. Runny nose doesn't cause flu. You see what I'm saying? But both are useful. In fact, I would argue that since we're talking about this, so basically medical textbooks are written typically in the causal direction. They will tell you for this disease, the following symptoms are likely to be present with various probabilities. They normally don't give actual numeric probabilities, but they sort of say likely, less likely. Patients never go to the doctor to ask, doctor, I have flu. Can you check if I have runny nose? You see what I'm saying? They only seem to go for the other reason. I have runny nose. Can you check if I have flu? Both are useful. And in fact, by the way, Bayes' rule uses probabilities in the causal direction to answer questions in the diagnostic direction. That's the point of Bayes' rule. So for example, P disease given symptom is what the patient wants to know. But the textbook tells you P symptom given disease times P disease by P symptom is what you need. That's what doctors basically just do this without realizing. But anyway, in fact, certainty factors were used by history's first medical expert systems. Called Mycin and its descendants, which is actually the last time around AI was like hugely popular. Okay, and it worked. Now we say, how the heck did it work? But it worked in the sense that nobody sued anybody, presumably. Okay, but turns out that certainty factors can have semantic problems, such as you can have rain going grass-fed causes rain, and you throw in both, you can get into crazy circular reason. Okay. Then the last thing that I want to mention to you, so basically certainty factors really should not be used. Instead, you just use normal probabilities. And the problem with normal probabilities is that normal probabilistic reasoning basically doesn't have what's called truth functionality, that I'll mention in a minute. That somehow the truth of the query, the probability of a query, is not very easily computable from just multiplying some numbers in a single chain of rules. There can be non-local interactions. And to make it simple, you will do things like certainty factors, and that doesn't work. So basically, people went back to probabilities after. Okay. Then there's fuzzy logic, which is a more controversial topic. Okay. People are still doing fuzzy logic. And so I want to tell you what fuzzy logic is. It's basically, in the case of fuzzy logic, you assume that each proposition has a degree of truth. So the interesting difference, basically, let me see if I can get back to that. Yeah, there. Remember this picture? Okay, the ontological and epistemological commitments, both propositional, basically the epistemological commitment of propositional logic is that things are true or false in a given world. Either they are true or they are false in a given world. There is no in between. But in a set of worlds, of course, in some they can be true, some they can be false. So that means they are not all the time false or all the time. Whereas in the probabilistic reasoning, it is still the case that in any given world, the statement is either true or false. Probability tells you of the total number of worlds, what fraction of worlds is this statement true? You guys understand that? So it's basically the truth is 1 or 0. It's not degree of truth in any given world for probabilistic reasoning. But for fuzzy logic, truth itself is between 0 and 1. It can be 0.7. How probable is P? I mean, how true is P in this given world? You can say 0.9. So fuzzy logic makes a different epistemological commitment than probabilistic logic and propositional logic. And why do they do it? It turns out that if they do it, they get this truth functionality. It's actually such a nice logic. Once you figure out how to do probabilistic reasoning, you feel, I would much rather do this. It's so much simpler. But unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't make any sense. So in the case of fuzzy logic, you essentially generalize the notion of the propositional logic to take into account degrees of truth. In fact, it's not surprising for you to think that and can be thought of as the minimum of the two variables. If you think of variables values to be true, false, to be 1 and 0, and is the minimum of 1 and 0, or is the maximum of 1 and 0, or is the maximum of the two variables values. Not is the 1 minus of the value. So I will just use that same rules, except now I allow the truth value of every proposition to be any number other than 1 and 0 also. Any number between 1 and 0 is also a truth proposition. This is almost as good as certainty factors, because now the reasoning is just as simple as propositional reasoning. But the problem with that is it has its own semantic problems. So, for example, if the truth value of, let's say, truth value of A is 0.3, then the truth value of not A is 0.7, which means the truth value of A or not A is 0.7. But how does that make any sense? This is what I'm saying. This is like a central problem. And people always say, as long as you don't look that side closely, you can get going. And in fact, one of the most interesting things is that for a long time, again, people will say just the same thing that we're doing with neural networks. You say anything bad about fuzzy logic, people will say, come on, how can fuzzy logic be bad when we know that Japanese washing machines are using fuzzy logic? In fact, they were at one point of time. They would basically say, we are using fuzzy logic controllers for deciding when the washing machine will stop or continue running it. So it turns out that that's not actually an argument about the semantics. In fact, people have actually talked about, there's a nice paper called On the Paradoxical Success of Fuzzy Logic. And in general, if somebody ever says on the paradoxical success of and your name, they're not being nice to you. You're supposed to be a loser. How the heck did you succeed? Okay, so it turns out they basically make all these, semantic problems with it. Okay, that's fuzzy logic. Actually, the thing that I wanted to mention here, which is cute enough, but I don't have too much time, is to remember, just to remember in your head that the difference between fuzzy logic and probabilistic, normal logic, either probabilistic or propositional, is if you put a bunch of brown puppies and white puppies in a big bucket, you close your eyes and pick up a puppy, right? There are like 6 and 7, 13 puppies. So if you pick up a puppy, what is the probability that the one, you didn't open your eyes yet? What's the probability that you're holding a brown puppy? 7 out of 13. Now you open your eyes. This is 7/13 of the puppy to be brown and 6/13 of the puppy to be white? No. If you do this experiment many times, 7/13 of the time it will be brown only, and 6/13 of the time it will be white only, or not brown only. But on the other hand, if I throw in a bunch of mixed color puppies into the mix, see what I'm saying? They're probably the cutest puppies, crying out loud. Now all of a sudden, when I pick a puppy, it's not clear that you can still talk about the some number, but the point is, when you open your eyes, it may not actually be either brown puppy or white puppy. It can be, in fact, 6/13 white and 7/13 brown puppy. Remember puppies. That way you'll never go wrong in understanding fuzzy logic and propositional logic. You see what I'm saying? Okay. So basically, with all this, we will get to the probabilistic reasoning. I know I have to stop, but I want to just show you that basically what we will try to do is we will say, we will just provide the joint distribution for all the variables. So if you're, for example, looking at burglary, earthquake, alarm, John calls, Mary calls, right? There are 5 variables. They're all Boolean variables. If I give you the joint probability distribution of these 5 variables, which will be 2 to the power 5 numbers, which add up to 1. By the way, I mean, some people are looking like this, but if there are n variables, there are 2 to the power n entries in the joint probability distribution. If I view all those numbers, then every damn probabilistic reasoning query that you can ask about these variables can be answered. This is what I said long back, and you will again get this back into your heads. So we're done. Probabilistic reasoning is just providing the joint distribution. The real problem, it turns out, with the probabilistic reasoning is who is giving these numbers. Where are you getting these 2 to the power n numbers, where n is the number of variables? It's bad enough to get some sort of connections between the variables, but if you ask the doctors might tell you, yeah, I think A kind of is correlated with B, B is kind of correlated with C. But if you ask, tell me, is A correlated with B 0.7 or 0.7349? They'll say, go bug somebody else. So they won't know the numbers. So the question is, how do you reduce the number of numbers you need? Which is where that kid's question comes in. I'm sorry, you all look like kids to me, but this gentleman's question comes to, which is, if you want to provide joint distribution of A, B, C, D, E, in the worst case, you do need to provide 2 to the power 5 minus 1 numbers. In the best case, how many numbers do you provide? In the best case, you can assume A, B, C, D, E are all absolutely independent of each other. If they're independent, then you just need to provide 5 probabilities. Then every conjunctive probability is just multiplication of these small probabilities. So how did you solve the problem? By making independence assumptions. In particular, what we try to do when we come back, we'll see that the whole point of the game is to represent conditional independences between variables. You can't just assume everything is independent. That will make the problem easy, but it's not actually solving the real world problem. So the whole point is trying to represent compactly conditional independences. And so, for example, it turns out that this is the picture that we will provide for the Pearl example, where you'll say burglary and earthquake are connected to alarm, alarm is connected to John calls, Mary calls. That connections, those are called the topology of the network. That is the logical part. And then given the logical part, then specifying this network requires that for every node, you need to provide the conditional probabilities for that node given its immediate parents. That's it. So for example, for this guy, John, I need to provide P John given alarm. For Mary, I need to provide P Mary given alarm. For alarm, I need to provide P alarm given both burglary and earthquake because it has two parents. So notice that the total number of numbers that I need to actually provide is dominated by people with too many parents, nodes with too many parents. I mean, this is not family values networks, right? Networks can have nodes with many parents. If a node has n-1 parents, then you're screwed because you need 2 power n-1 numbers to specify the probability distribution for that node. So in this picture, if in fact all these variables are independent, what would the network look like? It would not have any edges. You understand what I'm saying? If in fact all these are very independent, then you will have, that would be the network with no edges. So the independence is captured by the missing links. And if you have 5 variables, then there basically can be a 5-sized complete directed acyclic graph. Any of those edges that are missing are giving you independences. Okay. This is what we'll keep pushing when we come back next, and essentially try to say that, basically specifying the Bayes network is specifying the topology as well as these numbers, and from which then you can compute the joint distribution, from which you can answer everything. And then we'll also say we won't necessarily have to compute the entire joint distribution. We'll compute only the piece that is required to just solve the problem. And before you come to the class, we'll actually listen to one of the Bayes network lectures, and then we'll repeat it again. And then I will stop here. You can ask me the questions while the rest of you please help yourself for the Raspberry Pi. Yeah. Siddharth, can you help these guys? Yeah. So there's a bunch of things there that you can use. There's that. This. And yeah, there you go. And if any of you want to take them home, put it in that. Okay, now. It would be indirect. This is the start. That basically would have to be expected. We talk about specifying the topology.
I also got 5 hours of sleep. No, I'm not sure around 3:30. Yes, I've been very busy. I was trying to eat that. I feel like just a class. I have an exam. Proceed to leave by 35 minutes.
You'll have roommates.
Your class.
My thing is.
Mine too.